The signal came in at 3:14 in the morning. It came in quiet, the way bad news always does. No alarms, no flashing lights, just a soft ping on the Deep Space Array console at the orbital listening station above the Pacific Ocean. The technician on duty, a young man named Private Desmond Achike, almost missed it. He had been reading a novel on his tablet, half asleep, the way every night shift operator gets after the third hour of silence. The ping came again. He sat up. It was not a natural signal. Natural signals had patterns that nature made. Radio bursts from dying stars, the hum of pulsars, the static of background radiation. This was none of those things. This had structure. This had repetition that did not come from physics. This came from something that thought. Desmond stared at the screen for 4 minutes before he reached for the comm link. "Sir," he said, "you need to come see this." General Yara Osei arrived at the station 11 minutes later. She had dressed in the dark. Her boots were on the wrong feet for exactly 30 seconds before she noticed and fixed them in the elevator on the way up. She was 53 years old, had served in 3 planetary defense deployments, had seen things in orbit that most people on the ground would not sleep after hearing about, and she had the kind of face that said nothing when it needed to say nothing. She looked at the screen. She looked at it for a long time. "Run the translation filter," she said. "I already did," Desmond said. 3 times. She looked at him. "It translates," he said. "That's what I'm telling you." The signal translated. Not perfectly. Not cleanly. Languages 30,000 years removed from any living speaker do not translate cleanly. But the translation filter, built on 40 years of xenolinguistic research, cross-referenced against the oldest known alien communication fragments ever recovered, gave them something. It gave them enough. The message, in its rough translated form, said something like this: "We are returning. We left property on your planet. We are coming to collect it. Do not interfere. This is not a hostile action. We mean you no harm if you comply." General Osei read it once. She read it again. "Property," she said. "Yes, ma'am. They left property on our planet. That's what it says." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the station windows, the curve of the earth glowed blue and white below them, patient and enormous, the way it had always been. Cities lit the night side. The lights of São Paulo, the lights of Lagos, the great orange sprawl of the Indian subcontinent seen from above. 30,000 years of human history sitting down there, burning bright, completely unaware that something was coming back for something it had left behind. "How long before they arrive?" she said. Desmond checked his numbers. At their current trajectory and speed, 14 months. 14 months. She nodded once, the kind of nod that meant she had already started planning. "Get me the Secretary General," she said, "and the Defense Council. And wake up Dr. Selin Iden at the Xenoarchaeology Institute. She's been waiting for a call like this for 20 years. She'll be annoyed if we don't. It's 3 in the morning. I know what time it is." The story of the alien ship had been known for a long time. Not publicly, not officially, but known. The way governments know things they do not say out loud. The ship had been found in 1987, buried under 400 meters of rock and compressed sediment in northern Siberia. A mining survey team hit something that was not rock, not ore, not ice. They hit metal. Metal that no geological process had put there. The team leader, a geologist named Viktor Sorokov, had the presence of mind not to report it to his company. He reported it directly to the Soviet government. He was reassigned the next day to a very comfortable office in Moscow and spent the next 11 years being very comfortable and very quiet. The Soviet government told the Americans. This was itself a remarkable event. 2 enemies sharing a secret, but the object under the Siberian rock was remarkable enough to make enemies polite. The object was a spacecraft. Not human. Not anything human had ever made or imagined making. It was 340 meters long, shaped like nothing, with a clean name. Not a saucer, not a cylinder, not a wedge. The people who spent years studying it called it simply the vessel. It was intact. It was powered down. Its hull was a material that took 7 years of research just to classify, and another 12 years to figure out how to cut. They cut it eventually. Inside, they found storage, supplies, technology, equipment so far beyond human understanding, that the researchers spent the first decade just learning how to look at it, without making wrong assumptions. The ship had been there for approximately 30,000 years, give or take 3,000, based on the rock strata and the isotope dating. It had not crashed. The ground had simply grown over it. 30,000 years of geology, patient and indifferent, swallowing the ship the way the Earth swallows everything left on its surface long enough. The humans took everything they could understand. They studied it. They worked backward from the technology, the way early humans might have worked backward from a dropped lighter, trying to understand fire by understanding the mechanism. Some of what they found they understood in 50 years. Some of it took 100. Some of it they were still working on. But they learned. That was the thing about humans. That was always the thing. They learned. When the Defense Council met, 48 hours after the signal, the chamber was not large, and it was not comfortable. It had been designed to function as a bunker if needed, deep under Geneva, and it looked like it. Gray walls, long table, the kind of fluorescent light that makes everyone look tired. General Osei stood at the head of the table. The faces looking back at her belonged to 11 people who collectively controlled the largest coordinated military force in human history. The Earth Defense Compact had existed for 60 years. It had been built for exactly this scenario, or something like it. Nobody had known for certain what the threat would look like. They had known it would come. The vessel had told them that much. Something had left it here. Something would eventually want it back. They sent a message, Osei said. Not a demand, not a declaration of war. A message telling us they're coming to collect property. That tells us things. It tells us they think they can just walk in, said Admiral Kurosawa. He was 71, Japanese, and had the lean look of a man who had spent 60 years disagreeing with people calmly. They think we're the same planet they left. They left 30,000 years ago, said Dr. Iden. She was the only civilian in the room, and she did not look like she noticed. She had arrived with 6 tablets, 4 coffee cups, and the expression of someone who had been waiting their whole life for this meeting. When they left, we were in the middle of the Upper Paleolithic. We lived in caves. We made art on walls. We were magnificent, but we did not have spacecraft. And now we do, said Osei. And now we do, Iden agreed. There was a silence around the table, not an uncomfortable one. The kind of silence where people are thinking instead of talking, which was the best kind. They said it was not a hostile action, said the Secretary General of the Earth Compact, a Nigerian woman named Adaeze Nwandu, who had the voice of someone accustomed to making large rooms listen. They said they meant no harm if we comply. If we comply, OCI repeated. Yes, that part. I noticed that part too. Nwandu leaned forward. What are our options? Osei looked at her for a moment. Then she looked around the table. Then she pulled up the first slide on the display behind her. It showed the vessel, or rather, it showed the space where the vessel had been. Beneath that image, it showed what had replaced it. The site in Siberia had been under joint international control for 51 years. In those 51 years, humans had not simply studied the alien ship. They had reverse engineered it. They had built from it. They had used the technology inside it as a ladder, step by step, rung by rung, pulling themselves up toward a capability they had not previously imagined. The slide showed 47 human spacecraft, vessels of human construction based on alien principles, powered by drives that humans had spent 2 generations learning to build. They were not copies of the alien ship. They were something different, something that had started with alien knowledge and then gone in directions alien minds had never gone. Our options, Osei said, are not as limited as they might expect. She clicked to the next slide. They sent a message 13 months ago, traveling at light speed. That means the message itself left their location 13 months ago. They may already be closer than we think, depending on their speed. She paused. We have 14 months, maybe less. We use every hour. To do what? Said Kurosawa. To make sure, Osei said, that when they arrive, they understand what Earth is now. She did not say it with heat. She did not say it with drama. She said it the way you state a fact. They remember leaving property on a primitive planet. They're coming back expecting to collect it from something small and frightened and unorganized. She looked at the room. We're going to make sure their first sight of this solar system corrects that expectation. Around the table, 11 of the most powerful military minds on Earth were quiet. Then Admiral Kurosawa, who had spent 60 years disagreeing with people calmly, nodded once. "Tell us what you need," he said. 14 months was not a long time. It was also exactly enough time, if you didn't waste any of it. Osei did not waste any of it. She slept 4 hours a night. She ate at her desk. She ran the largest coordinated military preparation in human history through 3 layers of secure communication networks and 7 simultaneous command structures, and she did it without the public ever knowing the reason, because a panicking public was a distracted one. The cover story was a large-scale joint defense exercise. This was not entirely a lie. The exercise was simply real. 72 human spacecraft, the full active fleet, were repositioned. Supply lines were secured. New platforms were brought online ahead of schedule, a thing that had never happened in the history of Earth compact procurement, which told everyone involved how serious the general was. Dr. Iden spent those 14 months doing what she always did, but faster and harder, and with more funding than she had ever seen in her life. She studied everything that had come out of the vessel. She studied the language fragments recovered from its data systems. She worked on the translation algorithms with a team of 40 xenolinguists, and she got the accuracy up from 62% to 89%, which was not perfect but was enough to hold a conversation. Probably. Hopefully. She also worked on a specific question that Osei had given her on the second day after the signal. The question was, what did they leave on this planet, and do they know we have it? The answer to the first part was obvious. The vessel. They left the vessel, or the vessel was left for them, or the vessel was here, for reasons that 30,000 years had obscured. Either way, the ship. The answer to the second part was not obvious. Iden spent 3 months on it. She studied the signal again. She studied the trajectory. She studied everything the alien data systems had told them about the civilization that built the vessel. Then she came to Osei's office with a look on her face that was half wonder and half dread. "They don't know," she said. "Don't know what?" "Any of it. They don't know we reverse-engineered the ship. They don't know we built our own fleet. They don't know what we are now." Iden sat down without being invited. "When they left, we were in caves. They have had no contact with Earth in 30,000 years. The signal they sent, it was sent to a planet they remember, a primitive world. They're not preparing for anything, because they don't think there's anything to prepare for." Osei thought about that. She thought about the lights of Earth from orbit, Sao Paulo, Lagos, the Indian subcontinent burning bright. She thought about 72 human spacecraft holding position in the dark between planets, waiting. She thought about what the aliens were going to see when they came back to collect their property from the small primitive planet they had left it on. A slow thing moved across her face. Not quite a smile. Not quite. "Good," she said. Outside the station windows, the Earth turned slowly on its axis, patient as it had always been, full of a species that had been left behind once, 30,000 years ago, on a cold rock in the dark. They had not stayed behind. They never did. They came out of deep space on a Tuesday. No particular reason for it to be a Tuesday. The universe did not care about the human calendar. But it was a Tuesday, early morning, when the long-range sensors at the outer perimeter array picked up the first solid contact. Not a signal this time, not radio waves translated through filters, but an actual physical presence. Mass, drive signature, something real and large moving through the outer solar system at a speed that made human engineers look at the readings and then look at each other. It was fast. Not light speed, nothing moved at light speed, but fast in the way that said whoever built the drive system did not have the same engineering limitations humans had started with. The key word was started with. General Osei was in her command chair on the bridge of the ECS Adamantine when the contact report came through. The Adamantine was the flagship of the Earth Compact Fleet. Adamantine was the flagship of the Earth Compact Fleet, 410 meters long, and it sat at the edge of the asteroid belt, with 31 other ships arranged around it in a formation that looked, from above, like a hand with too many fingers. Relaxed, patient, not aggressive, not yet. "How many ships?" she said. "Confirmed count is 3, said her sensor officer, Lieutenant Priya Mehta. 1 large vessel, 2 smaller. The large one is consistent with the vessel profile, same drive signature, Similar mass displacement. She paused. The two smaller ones are escorts. They brought friends. Yes, ma'am. 3 ships. OC had 72. She did not say this out loud because the people around her already knew it, and saying obvious things out loud was a habit she had broken 30 years ago. Open a channel, she said. Which frequency? All of them. I want them to hear us before they see us. The comm officer, a steady young man named Sergeant Jonas Haley, who never looked flustered regardless of circumstances, worked his console for a moment. Channel open, General. All frequencies, including the one they used for the original signal. Osei leaned forward slightly. She had rehearsed this. She and Dr. Iden had rehearsed it together, working through the translation software, getting the pronunciation as close as possible on a language that had not been spoken in 30,000 years. She was not going to get it perfect. She was going to get it close enough. Close enough was sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe. This is General Yara Osei, she said, commanding officer of the Earth Compact Defense Fleet. We received your message. We know why you're here. Before you enter the inner solar system, we want to talk. She let the translation software carry it out into space. The signal would take minutes to reach them. Their response would take minutes to come back. She settled in her chair and waited the way she had learned to wait, without movement, without impatience, like a mountain that had decided to sit there until the weather made up its mind. The response came back in 11 minutes. Hailey ran it through the translation filter twice before he played it. Even then, it was rough. Alien grammar did not map cleanly onto human sentence structure. Some of it came out as fragments. Some of it came out backward. But the meaning was there, underneath the broken syntax, the way the shape of a face is still there underwater. The message said, "You speak the old language. This is unexpected. We acknowledge your transmission. We are on a recovery mission only. Stand aside. We will collect what belongs to us and depart. No conflict is necessary." Osei listened to it. She listened to the words and also to what was underneath them. Unexpected. That was the word she noted. Not alarmed, not frightened. Unexpected. As if they had received a mildly surprising piece of information that required a small adjustment to their expectations. They were still the kind of confident that did not know it should be worried. "Dr. Iden," she said. The xenolinguist was on the secondary bridge, patched into the comm system through a secured line from the station above Earth. Her voice came through the speakers with a slight delay. "I heard it. Your read? They're surprised we can communicate, but they're not alarmed. They're treating us the way you treat a previously silent dog that's learned to say one word. A pause. They think it's remarkable. They don't think it changes anything." "That's what I thought. What do you want to do?" Osei looked at the sensor display. The 3 alien ships were still moving. They had not slowed down. They had received a communication from an organized military fleet, and they had sent back a polite instruction to move aside, and they had not slowed down at all. "Send them the coordinates for a meeting point," Osei said. "Neutral space, inside the asteroid belt. Tell them we will meet them there before they proceed, and that we have some things to discuss that are relevant to their mission. And if they don't stop?" Osei was quiet for a moment. "They'll stop," she said. "How do you know?" "Because we're going to show them something first." The thing she showed them was the fleet. Not all of it. She pulled 20 ships out of their holding positions and moved them into a visible formation, not blocking the alien ship's path, not threatening, just present. 41 human spacecraft arranging themselves in the alien ship's direct line of sight, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that required technology, required communication systems, required a command structure, required intelligence. A primitive cave species did not move 41 spacecraft in synchronized formation. The alien ship slowed down. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the sensor readings changed, and Lieutenant Meta reported the velocity reduction with a measured voice that only barely covered the fact that she was extremely pleased. "They're decelerating," Meta said, "coming to relative stop approximately 200,000 kilometers from the proposed meeting coordinates." "Good," Osei said. "Match their stop. Hold position. Let them look." She let them look for an hour. An hour of 41 human ships sitting in formation, running lights lit, drive signatures visible on any sensor system worth owning. An hour of being seen. An hour of being counted. Then the alien ships moved to the meeting coordinates. The meeting itself was conducted through a combination of long-range communication and short-range shuttle approach, because Osei was not about to dock with an unknown vessel when she could talk from a safe distance. Dr. Iden handled most of the translation, her voice calm and precise, her 40 years of study and 20 years of waiting, all coming down to this exchange in the asteroid belt above the plane of the ecliptic. The alien who spoke for their fleet was identified by their own communications as a senior recovery coordinator. The translation gave this title a few different possible renderings: commander, director, officer, but recovery coordinator seemed closest to the function described. His name, transliterated into something human tongues could manage, became something like Velsath. That was what Osei called him. The first thing Velsath said, after the formal identifications were exchanged, was, "How many of those vessels are functional?" Osei had Dr. Iden translate her answer precisely. "All of them." A pause, longer than communication delay required. "You built them," Velsath said. "Yes." Another pause. "When did your species develop space travel?" "We've had spacecraft in orbit since the 20th century of our calendar," Osei said. "We've had deep space-capable vessels for 60 years. She waited while that translated and traveled and returned. "You developed this independently," Velsath said. Not a question exactly. More like something someone says while they're rearranging a room in their head. Osei looked at the sensor display for a moment. The 3 alien ships sitting in space. Their vessel. Her people had examined every system, every component, every material. She could describe that ship's internal architecture in more detail than its builders probably could at this point. "We had help," she said. Dr. Iden, on the secondary bridge, made a small sound that might have been a laugh. The pause from Velsath was the longest yet. "The recovery vessel," he said. "Yes. You found it. In 1987. By our calendar. That's approximately 38 years ago. But we've known about it for much longer than that, in a different way. The geological strata, the anomalous readings, the mythology," she let that land. "Your ship has been on our planet for 30,000 years, Velsath. We had a long time to notice it." When his response came back, the translation filter had more difficulty with it. The sentence structure was unfamiliar, which Iden later said suggested a high degree of emotional loading. That the alien grammatical system, like the human one, became more complex and harder to parse when the speaker was processing something difficult. The rough translation was, "You used the technology from the recovery vessel. We studied it," Osei said. "Then we used what we learned. That equipment does not belong to you." OCA had expected this. She had thought about it for 13 months. She had thought about it across long nights in her office above the Pacific, and across longer days in briefing rooms full of people who wanted her to have a clean answer ready. She had a clean answer ready. "We found it on our planet," she said. "We studied it. We learned from it. That's what we do. That's what we've always done." She paused. "We're not returning the technology we built from what we learned, but we are prepared to discuss the original vessel and its remaining contents." The pause before Velsath's response was different this time. It was the kind of pause that had things inside it. "You are saying," he said, and the translation software rendered it carefully, "that you kept it." "We kept everything we recovered from the site. Yes." "And you believe you have the right to do this?" "We found it on our planet," Osei said again. "Your people left it there, unattended, for 30,000 years." She kept her voice level. "In the culture of every species that's ever developed property law, there's a concept that applies here. But I don't know your word for it. Ours is called adverse possession." Another long silence. Then Velsath said something that the translation software had real difficulty with. Iden worked at it for a few moments before she offered a rendering. "He's asking if you're saying this out of aggression or out of a genuine legal position." "Tell him both," Osei said, "and tell him it doesn't matter which, because the outcome is the same." The talks took 6 days. 6 days of communication, in a dead language translated imperfectly, between 2 species who had not spoken to each other since one of them had been painting mammoths on cave walls. 6 days of careful sentences and long pauses, and Dr. Iden on the secondary bridge with 4 coffee cups and the expression of someone who was going to write 12 books about this and didn't know where to start. Velsath was not stupid. None of the aliens were stupid. You did not build vessels that crossed the galaxy if you were stupid. What they were, Osei decided, was unprepared. They had come expecting an empty recovery. They had come expecting the primitive planet of their historical records. They had found a species with 72 warships. Warships was Velsath's word for them, translated roughly. Human preferred the term defense vessels, but Osei did not correct him. He was not wrong about what they could do. On the 4th day, Velsath asked her something she had not expected. How many of your people know we exist? Osei thought about that. Officially, a few thousand. People in the defense compact, the science community, certain government levels. She paused. Unofficially, the knowledge that something left that ship here, that something might come back for it, that has spread further. In stories, in theories, in a certain kind of human who looked at 30,000-year-old metal and understood what it meant. A pause. Your general population does not know. Not officially. And if they did? Osei looked out the viewport at the stars, at the distant smear of the asteroid belt, at the 3 alien ships sitting in space, smaller than she had expected, when you got down to it. Smaller than the weight of what they represented. Then I'd have a very different set of problems, she said, which is why I'd prefer we reach an agreement before I have to tell them. Velsath was quiet for a long time. On the 6th day, he said, we would like to see the vessel. Osei nodded once. To herself, in her empty office aboard the Adamantine, alone with the stars. I know, she said. She had been expecting that for 13 months too. The Siberian facility did not look like much from the outside. That was deliberate. From the air, it looked like a mining complex. Wide flat buildings with industrial rooflines, surrounded by the kind of flat gray Siberian landscape that discouraged people from looking too long. The access roads were real roads. The trucks that moved in and out were real trucks. The security checkpoints looked like the kind of thing any large industrial site would have. It had taken 60 years of committed effort to make the most significant archaeological and engineering site in human history look like a nickel mine. Velsath and 2 members of his crew came down in a human shuttle. This had been Osei's condition. They came in human transport, with human pilots, and they brought no equipment that hadn't been scanned 3 times before boarding. The aliens had accepted this. They had accepted it with the specific kind of compliance that is not agreement but calculation, the recognition that pushing back on this particular point was not worth what it would cost. Osei met them on the landing pad. She had 4 soldiers with her, dressed professionally, weapons holstered and visible. Not a threat, a statement of normalcy. This was how humans met guests, with people who had weapons, openly, because that was simply how things were done. Velsath was taller than she'd expected from the brief visual feeds. They all were. The 3 aliens stood somewhere between 2 and 2.5 meters, with a body plan that was roughly bilateral and roughly upright, but with joints that moved in directions that looked momentarily wrong before the eye adjusted. Their faces were angular. Their eyes were large and set in a way that gave them a wider field of vision than humans, which was something to remember. They stood on the landing pad and looked at the landscape, and then at the facility, and then at her. General Osei, Velsath said. He said it in the old language, which the translation software caught, but then he paused, and said something else, and what he said next was in rough but real English, accented in a way that had no Earth equivalent, but real. She had not expected that. You speak English, she said. I learned, he said, from your transmissions. You are a loud species. Your electromagnetic output has been reaching deep space for 120 of your years. The wide eyes moved across the facility. We have had time to listen. That was a thing to process later. She filed it. Welcome to Earth, she said. Come inside. They walked through 3 security checkpoints and 2 airlock-style doors before they reached the main excavation chamber, and Velsath was quiet for all of it. The 2 crew members with him were also quiet. They looked at things. The lighting, the materials, the equipment carried by the soldiers. They looked the way you look when you're revising an estimate in real time. The main excavation chamber was the size of a cathedral, which was the comparison every human visitor made upon seeing it for the first time. and Osei had heard it so many times that she'd stopped noticing it. But she noticed it again now, seeing it for the first time through alien eyes. The scale of it. The cave carved into the earth, supported by a framework of human engineering, lit by artificial lighting that filled every shadow, the smell of cold rock and machine oil, and the faint electrical smell of systems running at depth. And in the center of the chamber, where the vessel had been, there was now a shape in the rock that perfectly preserved the outline of something that was no longer there, like a mold, like the memory of an object, pressed into stone. Velsath stopped walking. He stood at the edge of the observation platform, and he looked at the shape in the rock. He stood there for a long time. "You moved it," he said. "We moved it in sections. Over 11 years, Osei said. The original hull proved cuttable with technology we developed, specifically for the purpose. The internal systems were removed intact where possible." She paused. "The vessel itself is about 4 kilometers from here, reassembled in a pressurized facility. We can take you there next if you want." "What did you remove from it?" Not a question. Or maybe a question that was too heavy to have a question mark at the end. "Everything," Osei said. "We cataloged everything we removed. I'll give you the full inventory. You're entitled to see it." She watched his face, and faces that were not human faces are hard to read, but she had been studying recordings of his communications for 6 days, and she had gotten some feel for the shape his expressions made when he was processing things he hadn't expected. That shape was on his face now. "We estimate we've understood approximately 60% of the technology we recovered. The other 40%, we're still working on it." A long silence. "You have been working on our technology for 38 years, he said. "Officially, yes. Unofficially, we've been working backward from what we suspected was there for much longer than that." Velsath looked at the shape in the rock, the impression left by something that had rested there for 30,000 years. "We came here to recover a supply cache," he said. "Medical supplies, mainly. Biological compounds we no longer manufacture in the quantities we once did. The vessel itself was secondary. It failed on a mapping mission, and the crew was rescued separately. The vessel was supposed to be recovered within 2 of your centuries." He paused. "Our civilization experienced some disruptions." "What kind of disruptions?" Another pause. The kind that meant the answer was large. "War," he said. "The kind that takes a long time to stop." He looked at her. "We lost 40% of our mapped territories. We lost the records of certain missions. The recovery vessel was lost from our records for approximately 12,000 of your years before it was found again in archives." He looked back at the rock. "We came as soon as we were able." Osei thought about that. 12,000 years of a ship lost in someone's archive. 30,000 years of geology growing over it in the dark. "I'm sorry," she said. "For the war." It was a strange thing to say to an alien. She said it anyway because she meant it. Velsath looked at her for a moment with those wide eyes. "Thank you," he said, in English. The vessel was 4 kilometers away, in a facility that had been built around it the way a house is sometimes built around a tree. The hull sections had been moved, catalogued, and reassembled with the care of people who understood they were working with the most important object ever found. Some sections were damaged from the original failure that had stranded it. Most were intact. Velsath walked around it for 40 minutes without speaking. His 2 crew members walked with him, and the 3 of them moved in that wrong-jointed way along the length of the hull, stopping at specific points, occasionally speaking to each other in their own language, which the translation software caught some of and missed most of. Osei walked at a respectful distance with Dr. Iden, who had flown from Geneva for this, and was barely holding herself together with professional decorum. "He's upset," Iden murmured. "He's not showing it," Osei said. "Not in his face, but watch his hands." The xenolinguist nodded slightly toward Velsath. "The way he's holding them. That posture came up in the communication fragments we recovered from the ship's data systems. It's associated with grief responses." Osei watched his hands. The way they were pressed flat against his sides, very still. The way a person presses their hands together to keep from shaking. "He's grieving the ship," she said. "Or what the ship represents. What was lost. 30,000 years of it." Osei let him walk. After 40 minutes, Velsath came back to where she was standing. His expression had gone through something, and come out the other side of it. "The hull section's in Section 7, he said. "The damage pattern. That's from the initial drive failure, not from your excavation." "Yes." Our analysis matched that conclusion. The internal systems you removed. He paused. The biological storage units. The medical compound canisters. Intact, Osei said. We identified them. We did not open them. We weren't able to determine the contents precisely, and we erred on the side of caution. She looked at him. They're in climate-controlled storage. The seals appear to be holding. Something moved through his expression. Relief, she thought, or the alien equivalent of it. Those compounds, he said carefully, are why we came. I know. There is a disease, he said, in one of our remaining territories. It is not like your diseases. It does not kill quickly. It takes decades. It takes children. He stopped, started again. The compounds stored in that vessel are from an era when we manufactured a treatment. We no longer have the manufacturing base. We have been searching for surviving stores for 60 years. The facility was very quiet. Dr. Iden made a small sound. Very small. Osei stood very still for a moment. She thought about the sealed storage units. She thought about 60 years of a species looking for medicine. She thought about children and decades, and the particular slow violence of a disease that takes its time. Come with me, she said. The storage wing of the facility was clean and cool, and lit with the kind of steady white light that meant precision work happened here. 612 sealed units, arranged in rows, catalogued with the combination of alien symbols from the ship's own labeling system and human numbering that the research team had developed as a cross-reference over 30 years. Velsath walked the rows. He stopped at a specific section. He looked at 3 units together. He read the alien symbols on their seals, and something changed in his face. Real change. Not the controlled, careful shifting of a negotiator, but something that didn't ask permission before it arrived. These are them, he said. Can you tell me what's inside? Iden asked. He told them. The translation was complex, but the research team had been taking notes on the alien pharmaceutical nomenclature for years, and Iden matched the terms against the database in real time on her tablet. Her face changed as she worked. We've analyzed the compound structure from external scanning, she said. We didn't know what it was for, but we have a full molecular profile. She looked up at Velsath. We can synthesize this. He went very still. What? We can synthesize the compound. We can't open those units. We're not certain what exposure risks might exist, but we've scanned the molecular structure in detail. We have pharmaceutical manufacturing infrastructure. If you share the treatment protocols with us, you can manufacture it, Velsath said. We would need your protocols, and your verification that our synthesis was accurate, but yes. The wide eyes moved between Iden and the storage units and Osei. In exchange for what? He said. Osei looked at him. This was the moment. 13 months of preparation, 6 days of negotiation, 40 minutes of him grieving his ship. It had all been building to this room, this moment, this question. She had thought about her answer for a long time. Nothing, she said. Velsath was quiet. You came here for medicine for sick children, Osei said. We have the capacity to help. We're going to help. That's not a negotiating position. That's just what we're going to do. The 2 crew members had stopped moving. Velsath looked at her for a long time. You are a strange species, he said. We've been told. You threaten with weapons, and then offer medicine with no conditions. We don't threaten, Osei said. We show. There's a difference. She let that sit. We showed you what we are. Now you know. We don't need to extract something from you to make that point. The point's already made. He was still looking at her. What do you want from us then? Information, she said. Not demanded. Shared, if you're willing. We've been alone in this solar system for a long time, looking at the stars and wondering. We'd like to know what's out there. She met his eyes, those wide alien eyes that saw a wider world than hers did. That's all. Velsath stood in the storage wing of the Siberian facility, surrounded by the medicine his people had been searching for across 60 years of dying, and he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something in his own language, not for the translation software, not for her, something private, something that might have been an oath or a prayer or simply the name of something he'd been afraid to hope for. Iden caught enough of it to write in her notes later that it translated, roughly, as, "We have found it. We have finally found it." She did not share this translation with Velsath. Some things were not hers to report. The synthesis took 19 days. 19 days of human pharmaceutical engineers working alongside Velsath and one of his crew members, a biochemist whose transliterated name became something like Reen, in a cleanroom facility outside of Geneva. 19 days of language barriers crossed with careful diagrams and molecular models, and the occasional moment of pure, frustrated silence when two species built on different biological premises tried to describe the same chemical process and realized they had invented entirely different vocabularies for it. Dr. Iden was present for all of it. She had not slept more than 5 hours any of those 19 nights, and she looked exactly like that, but she was there, bridging the gap between what Reen said and what the human chemists heard, pulling the translation software forward by hand, in places where it still stumbled. General Osei was not there. She was in orbit, managing the other 14 problems that had arrived alongside the alien ships, because a first contact event does not have only one problem. It has a cascade of them. The public knew now, or most of them did. It had come out on the 9th day, through a source that the Earth Compact's security analysis traced back to a mid-level staff member at the Geneva facility, who had a personal blog and a conscience that had decided, somewhere around day 7, that the whole planet deserved to know what was happening in its solar system. The security breach was the kind that could not be unbreached. The Earth Compact's communications office had spent 6 hours deciding between denial, obfuscation, and simply telling the truth. They told the truth, or most of it. The public announcement was careful, measured. It described the alien contact as peaceful, the aliens' purpose as a recovery mission, the discussions as ongoing. It did not describe the full military deployment. It did not describe the storage units and the medicine. It focused on the headline and let the headline do its work. The headline was, "We are not alone, and we have known for 50 years. The reaction was exactly everything, all at once. Osei spent the first 48 hours after the announcement reading reports from every major city on Earth. The reactions were not uniform, and they were not rational, and they were not simple, which was exactly right, because the human species encountering proof of extraterrestrial intelligence for the first time was not a situation that called for uniformity or rationality or simplicity. People prayed, people panicked, people went into the streets in 50 cities and held signs that said both welcome and go home in equal numbers. Financial markets did strange things. 3 governments that had been quietly skeptical of the Earth Compact's defense spending for years suddenly became very publicly supportive of it. Religious leaders from every tradition on Earth spent those 48 hours publicly processing something enormous, and some of them were graceful about it, and some of them were not, and all of them were doing the same thing everyone else was doing, which was trying to fit a very large fact into an existing understanding of the world. Velsath asked about the reactions. He asked carefully, the way someone asks about something they know might be sensitive. He and Reen had been monitoring the public transmissions. Of course they had. They had been monitoring human transmissions for longer than Osei had been alive, and he had formed some impressions he was not certain how to characterize. "Your people are afraid," he said. "Some of them," Osei said. She was on a comlink from orbit, his image on her screen, the Earth turning slowly behind his shoulder on the secondary display. "Some of them are excited. Some of them are angry that it was kept from them. All of those things are happening at the same time. You expected this." "Yes. You were not afraid to tell them." "I was afraid of exactly one thing," Osei said, "that it would happen the wrong way, at the wrong moment, without context. A leak from a frightened bureaucrat instead of an announcement from a position of," she paused, choosing the word, "confidence." Velsath considered that. "You wanted your people to see that you had not been defeated before they found out there was anything to be defeated by." She looked at him. He understood things. This alien, in a clean room in Geneva, surrounded by the medicine his people needed, watching human beings try to understand the universe they were living in. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what I wanted." On the 14th day, while the synthesis was still ongoing, Velsath asked to see something else. Not the facility. Not the stored equipment from the ship, which had been cataloged and presented and discussed in detail across several long sessions. He asked to see a city. Osei considered this for about 90 seconds. "Which one?" she said. "The largest." Which was a complex question, depending on how you measured it. She chose Tokyo. Not because Tokyo was inarguably the largest, but because Tokyo was, in her judgment, the most legible city on Earth for someone trying to understand what the human species had built. It was dense and layered and organized and chaotic in specific ways, and it was beautiful the way cities are beautiful, when they have been lived in intensely for a very long time. Velsath and Rien came down from Geneva in a closed transport with 4 security people, and Dr. Aydin and Osei herself. They arrived in the early morning, when the city was just beginning its daily life, and they walked. Just walked. Osei had arranged a security cordon that looked like nothing from the outside. Plainclothes operatives, street-level surveillance, pre-cleared routes. But the city itself was not closed. The people in it were going about their lives. The trains were running. The shops were opening. The smell of food from early vendors was in the air, the particular morning smell of a city coming awake. Velsath walked through it with his hands at his sides and his wide eyes taking in things faster than a human eye would. The advertising, the faces, the infrastructure of streets and wires and transit lines, the way a city organizes the movement of millions of bodies through the same space. He stopped at a crossing. A normal pedestrian crossing, the kind that exists in every major city on Earth. The signal changed. A crowd of people moved across. Business people and students and elderly couples and children in school uniforms and delivery workers and people who were clearly already arguing on their phones and had been arguing for some time. The whole cross-section of human daily life, shuffling across a street in the morning light. Rien said something to Velsath in their language. Aydin caught it. Later, she told Osei what it was. Rien had said, "How many of them are there?" And Velsath had said, 8 billion. And Rien had been quiet for a long moment and then said, 8 billion. And we left them here. Over the next 4 days, small things happened that did not make it into any official report. Velsath bought food from a street vendor. He did not eat it. The biochemistry wasn't compatible, something Rien confirmed quickly, when Osei's security team tensed. But he paid for it, using the currency equivalent exchange system that Aydin had set up for exactly this kind of contingency, and he thanked the vendor in rough English. The vendor, a small woman in her 60s, who sold rice and pickled vegetables from a cart she had run for 30 years, looked at him for one long moment, and then told him the next one was free. There was no camera on that exchange. Osei heard about it from one of her operatives. She thought about it for a long time. Rien spent 3 hours in a bookstore. Not a large one. A small, independent one in a side street. The kind that exists in every city that has loved books long enough. Rien could not read the books, but she stood in the aisles and ran her fingers along the spines, the way someone does when they are understanding something that is not about the specific content of any one shelf. Aydin, who was with her, said it was one of the stranger and more moving hours of her professional life. On the 17th day, Velsath asked Osei a question she had not expected. They were in a meeting room in Geneva. Quiet. Just the 2 of them, and a translation unit, and the city sounds coming in faintly through sealed windows. When we left this planet, he said, there was nothing here but small groups of early humans, cave paintings, fire. Yes. We did not think about them, he said. When we left, we did not think about what they might become. He paused. They were not relevant to our mission. Osei was quiet. We left a vessel the size of a small city on their planet, he said, for 30,000 years, and we did not think about them. No, she said, you didn't. Does that, he searched for the word, does that anger you? She thought about the honest answer. She thought about the caves and the fire and the 30,000 years of completely unintentional abandonment. She thought about the species that had picked up what was left behind and used it to climb all the way here, to this room, to this conversation. It did, she said. For a long time, it was an anger we carried, that something had been here and left without caring, without considering us. She met his eyes. But then I thought about what we built with what you left, and I thought that maybe not being considered was the best thing that could have happened to us. Velsath was very still. If you had come back in 500 years, she said, we would not have been ready. Not for this conversation. Not for any of it. She leaned back slightly. You waited 30,000 years, long enough for us to grow into something that could meet you on the same ground. We did not plan that, he said. I know, she said. That's what I mean. The synthesis was verified on the 19th day. Reen ran the final molecular comparison, the synthesized compound against the scanned profile of the original stored canisters, and she ran it 3 times because the first 2 times she did not trust the result. The result was the same all 3 times. It was a match. Not approximate. Not close. A full molecular match, within the tolerance margins that Reen specified, and then re-specified more strictly, and then watched the human pharmaceutical team hit again. Reen said something in her own language, something fast and short, and Aiden got most of it. It translated to something like, "They actually did it." The clean room was very quiet for a moment. Then one of the human chemists, a young woman named Dr. Fatima Nasser, who had been working 20-hour days for 19 consecutive days, and had the specific look of someone running entirely on purpose and very little else, said, "Does it work? The compound itself. Did we get the right thing?" Reen looked at her through the clean room glass, and then looked at Velsath, and then looked back at the human chemist. And even with the translation barrier and the alien face, and the wide eyes that worked on different principles, something came through clearly. "Yes," Reen said, in English, her first word in a human language. Dr. Nasser sat down on the floor. Just sat down, right there, cross-legged on the clean room floor, because standing felt like too much. Nobody said anything about it. Later that evening, Osei sat in her office in the Geneva facility and wrote the report. Not the public version. That would go through the communications team, through the Secretary General's office, through 17 layers of review. This was the actual report, the one that would go into the sealed archive, that would not be opened for 50 years. She wrote about the vessel and the medicine, and the 19 days and the street crossing in Tokyo, and the woman with the rice cart who had said the next one was free. She wrote about Velsath standing in the storage wing with his hands pressed flat against his sides. She wrote about Reen in the bookstore. She wrote, "They came back for property. They found a civilization. I believe they will need time to recalibrate everything they thought they understood about this mission, and about this planet, and possibly about us. I recommend we give them that time. Some adjustments cannot be rushed." She paused. She added, "Humanity did not ask to be left behind, but we were. And we did what we always do. We made something from it. I think, on reflection, Velsath understands this. I think it may be the thing about us that surprises him most. Not the ships, not the weapons, not the technology. The fact that we took a wound and made a ladder from it." She stopped writing. Outside the window, Geneva was doing what it always did in the evening, going about its life, lights coming on in windows, the sound of traffic and trams and the particular ambient hum of a city that had never once stopped being alive. 8 billion of them. And they had started in caves. The alien ships left orbit on a Wednesday. 3 vessels, loaded with 112 cases of synthesized medical compound. Enough, Reen had calculated, to begin full treatment protocols in the affected territories within the next 18 months. The original storage units from the vessel remained in the Siberian facility, in their climate-controlled racks, sealed and intact. The Earth Compact had offered to transfer them. Velsath had declined. "Keep them," he had said, on the last morning, standing on the same landing pad in Siberia where he had first arrived, looking at the same flat gray landscape that discouraged people from looking too long. "You have been better custodians of them than we would have been." Osei had not argued with that. The shuttle lifted. The alien ships moved into departure trajectory. On the long-range sensors aboard the Adamantine, General Osei watched the 3 drive signatures arc outward, past the asteroid belt, past the outer planets, past the Kuiper belt. She watched until they were below the sensor threshold. Then she took the elevator down to the mess deck and got a cup of coffee, and sat at a table in the corner like any normal person and drank it. Admiral Kurosawa found her there 20 minutes later. He got his own coffee. He sat down across from her without being invited, the way you don't need to be invited after 60 years in the same professional world. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. "We made medicine for aliens. We did. And in exchange we got..." He paused, thinking about how to characterize it. "Interstellar cartography, 12 new propulsion system concepts, 3 new materials that our engineers are already arguing about, and a standing agreement to open a formal diplomatic exchange within 10 of their years." "That's about right." Kurosawa drank his coffee. You gave them the medicine with no conditions. The rest came anyway. Most things worth having come when you stop making them conditions, she said. He thought about that. You learned that in the military? I learned that everywhere, she said. Same lesson shows up everywhere if you pay attention. They drank their coffee in comfortable silence. Two old soldiers sitting in the mess deck of a warship, orbiting the planet they had spent their lives defending, on the morning after the most significant event in human history. What happens now? Kurosawa said. It was the question everyone was asking. Every government, every press organization, every citizen who had spent the last 3 weeks absorbing the fact of contact and was now trying to figure out what their life looked like on the other side of it. Osei thought about her honest answer. We wait 10 years for the diplomatic exchange, she said. We use the time, we learn from what they shared with us. We build. She paused. We do what we've always done. And if they come back with more ships next time, then we'll have more ships too. Kurosawa made a small sound that was probably a laugh. You know what they're going to go home and tell their people? Approximately, she said. They're going to say they found a species that went from the Stone Age to warships in 30,000 years, using a broken-down ship they found in the dirt. That's a fair summary. And that species offered them medicine with no strings attached. Also fair. He shook his head slowly, the gesture of someone recalibrating, the way everyone had been recalibrating for 3 weeks. We're a confusing species. We try, she said. 3 months after the alien ships departed, the Earth Compact released the full record. Not everything. The detailed military positioning and some of the technical specifications of the human fleet remained classified for reasons that were straightforward security logic. But the broad record, the discovery of the vessel, the 51 years of research, the 14 months of preparation, the 6 days of negotiation, the 19 days of synthesis, the diplomatic agreement. The world got to read all of it. The reaction was different from the first announcement. The first announcement had been shock, raw, immediate, the kind of reaction that hasn't had time to think. This was something else. This was a species reading its own history and finding something in it that surprised them. The emails and letters and communications that flooded into the Earth Compact offices in the weeks after the release were varied and contradictory, and human, in all the ways human communication is. But one thread kept appearing in them, across languages and cultures, and every kind of person who writes to governments when they feel strongly about something. The thread was, we did that. Not triumphant, most of the time, more like recognition, the slow, quiet understanding that 30,000 years of human history, everything that had happened on this planet since some ancestor stood in front of a cave wall and decided to make a picture of what they saw, had been building, quietly and without knowing it, toward the capacity to receive a strange transmission and stand up, organized and ready, and say, yes, we know why you're here, and we'd like to talk first. Dr. Iden wrote a paper. Then she wrote 4 more papers. Then she wrote a book, and then another book, and then a third book, that she described in interviews as the only book I was actually trying to write. The third book was not about linguistics or xenoarchaeology, or the technical details of the synthesis. It was about the hour she had spent in the bookstore in Tokyo with Reen, watching an alien run her fingers along the spines of books she couldn't read. The book's argument was simple. What we found in that bookstore was not that we were the same. What we found was that the impulse to preserve, to record, to put things in a form that outlasts the body that made them, that impulse is not uniquely human. And if it is not uniquely human, then perhaps human is not the boundary we thought it was. The book sold 12 million copies. Iden said in interviews that this was somewhat beside the point, but she was glad people were reading it. General Yara Osei retired 14 months after the alien ships left. She had planned to retire before the contact. She had been planning it for 2 years. The timing had been moved, then moved again, and then there had been the signal, and then 14 months of work, and then 3 months of aftermath, and then 2 more months of testimony before various bodies that needed to be testified before, and then the release, and then the reactions. And then one quiet Tuesday morning, she sat in her office on the adamantine and wrote the letter. She was not given a small retirement. The ceremony was large. It was the kind of ceremony that governments hold when they want to visibly honor something without quite knowing how to describe it. She sat through 3 speeches, and 2 musical performances, and a moment where the Secretary General said things that were generous and mostly accurate, and she accepted a decoration that represented the highest honor the Earth Compact gave, and she shook every hand, and she smiled at everyone, and she meant it. She retired to a house in coastal Ghana. She had been born there, many decades and many deployments ago, and she had always meant to go back. The house was close enough to the ocean to hear it at night. She kept a vegetable garden. She slept 8 hours a night for the first time in 30 years, and her body did not know what to do with this for approximately 2 weeks before it figured it out. She gave occasional interviews, not many. She was not the kind of person who became a public figure by choice, and the public figure who had existed during the contact period was a version of her built for that specific purpose, and now that purpose was served. She wrote one public statement, in her first year of retirement, that was short and not decorated with the language of diplomacy. It said, "We were small once. We made pictures on walls. We survived ice and plague and war, and every version of difficulty that a hostile universe can put in front of a species. We climbed. Every generation climbed. Most of them did not know they were climbing. They thought they were just living. But climbing is what they were doing. When something came back for what it had left on our planet, it found that we had used it to climb further than it expected. That is the only story I know how to tell about our species. It is also the only story I need to." 10 years later, as specified in the diplomatic agreement, a different alien ship appeared at the edge of the solar system, larger than the 3 recovery ships, carrying a formal delegation and a request to establish ongoing diplomatic contact, carrying, also, information. 30,000 years of galactic history, mapped territories, the locations of a dozen species that had been found and lost, and found again, across the long, complicated life of a civilization that had been doing this longer than humanity had existed. The Earth Compact sent a formal delegation to meet them. The delegation was led by a young woman named Captain Desmond Achike Jr., the son of the private who had heard the first ping in the middle of the night 10 years before, and had the presence of mind to reach for the comlink. He had grown up with the story. He had joined the compact because of it. He had worked for this specific assignment for 5 years and had beaten out 400 applicants to get it. He was 29 years old, and he was very good at his job, and he was, if anyone asked him, in a state of something that sat between terror and joy, and had no exact word for it in any human language. He stood on the bridge of the ECS First Contact. They had named the ship, which was either embarrassing or perfect, depending on who you asked. And he looked at the alien vessel on his sensors, and he thought about his father, waking up in the middle of the night to a ping. Then he straightened his uniform, and he reached for the comm. "Open a channel," he said. "All frequencies." General Osei, retired, heard about the second contact on the radio in her kitchen. She was making tea. The morning was warm. The sound of the ocean came through the window, patient and enormous. The radio described the incoming ship, the delegation, the position of Earth's response fleet. The host was excited in the way radio hosts get excited about history happening in real time, the voice rising and falling with the weight of it. Osei listened while the tea steeped. She thought about a crossing in Tokyo, an old woman with a rice cart, a storage wing full of medicine, a shape in the rock where a ship had rested for 30,000 years. She thought about what Velsath had said in that quiet meeting room in Geneva. "You are a strange species." She poured her tea. Outside, the ocean kept doing what it always did, moving, restless, patient, enormous, carrying on. 8 billion of them, climbing. She took her tea to the garden and went to check on the tomatoes. Some things continue whether or not they are watched. The climbing was one of those things. It always had been.